5 people have died in a horrific crash on the N3 near Ladysmith, with 2 others injured in a collision. In a separate incident, a fuel tanker exploded on the N2 North near Edwin Swales Drive, south of Durban. No fatalities have been reported in the explosion, and the driver escaped unharmed. Cleanup operations are underway. Forensic investigator Stan Bezuidenhout joins us now for a discussion on some of the carnage we are seeing on South Africa's roads during the festive season. Stan, very good morning to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Quena, and it's always a pleasure, and Merry Christmas to you and all your viewers.
Merry Christmas to you too. Let's look at this issue of the fuel tanker exploding. I mean, this comes where last year we had another tanker, well, different story really, exploding, in which, about 40 lives were lost. Is this something that we should be worried about, that it's becoming a little bit too common or too regular?
Well, in my mind, if we look at the coincidence, the 2 incidents both happening on the 24th of December, at the very least we should be concerned about that. There is a bit of a trend that is developing with regards to serious incidents, but it's always difficult to detect whether there are more incidents or whether they get more attention because of other incidents. We know that the tanker explosion happened in Boksburg, and immediately after that, every gas tanker that caught the light made it onto news or media. So it's difficult to determine whether it's a trend or whether it's interest. But definitely, we can always hope for days when these kinds of things will not be happening anymore.
And obviously that's cause for concern, because this is hazardous material that is being transported. What should, when you look into something like that, Stan, especially as ordinary citizens who drive with these tankers on the road, what are we taking, necessary precautionary measures, be it from us as those who are around or those who are transporting these hazardous materials?
So, Quena, the fact is that I think there is a definite and a clear and present danger, actually, with regards to the public awareness element. It's very important that members of the public realize that any truck or even a train transporting chemicals will typically have huge warning placards on them, those orange signs with numbers on them, and often you see flammable or acid or whatever. And the fact is that there is still, I've looked at this video, for instance, regarding this tanker that was on fire on the N2 in Durban, and you see that the vehicles are turning very close to the tanker. At least they are turning away, and we don't have people walking towards it. But whenever any vehicle is involved in an incident where even a leak or a major crash, or most specifically a fire develops, it's always a good idea to get at least 250 meters away immediately. There's no time to figure out as a member of the public what the chemicals might be, what they could be, how dangerous it can be, or how dangerous it will be. So it's extremely important that people start realizing that the minute you see these kinds of things, disasters could definitely follow, and you should move away as far as possible. What concerns me more is the fact that I saw that the fire department were present, and as required, they were fighting this fire. But technically speaking, those fire operators themselves were well within what is called the blast radius if that thing had to go into an explosion, typically called a BLEVE, or a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. Now, you cannot get away from them having to do their job, but that begs the next question. Are we equipped to handle these kinds of fires in South Africa?
And I guess just before we talk about whether we are equipped to handle that, the point that you are making about staying away from incidents like this as just ordinary citizens, as sad as it is, the situation in Boksburg, it's a typical example of what should not happen, because the driver did say that at some point he was screaming and shouting at residents to stay away from the truck itself, but some people wanted to see, and that's where the accident itself happened. But then, in terms of just knowledge, is there enough material out there for people to learn from to make sure that to avoid this sort of trucks? Because, I mean, again, whether it's petrol, it's gas, it's diesel, I'm sure the warning signs are different. Stan?
Yes, absolutely. And no, there's definitely not enough awareness. Now, the first question we'd have to ask is, whose job is it to educate the public? in terms of the law, let's start with the duties of an operator. In terms of the law, if you operate the truck to transport chemicals, you are required by law to put those signs on them. They're all orange. They all have like 4 numbers on them, whatever. There's a whole book called the Emergency Response Guidebook that has the numbers in and explains exactly what chemicals they are, how far you should evacuate, etc. But the public won't have access to that. So whenever you see any warning signs on a vehicle, assume the worst and save your life. Then on the issue of awareness, I'm hoping that somebody like perhaps the Road Traffic Management Corporation, perhaps the Department of Transport, perhaps the Ministry of Safety and Security, or at least somebody with a duty and responsibility to safeguard the public, is going to launch a campaign. We're sitting 1 year away from the Boksburg explosion. I've been engaged by various people in the private sector to speak at conferences and to contribute, including the LP Gas Association, in association with gas associations, even from other countries. So even in other countries, they were looking at what happened in Boksburg and trying to find ways to improve it. But that's a very, let's call it, it's almost like a silo of awareness within that industry. Everybody else, specifically the public, and perhaps the first place to start is to educate police, Metro Police, traffic officers, paramedics, first responders, etc. Because even, for instance, with this Boksburg explosion, while the truck driver was trying to help or to warn people and evacuate them, he himself succumbed to gas inhalation and actually lost consciousness. Now, when somebody loses consciousness, it should be a dire warning for everybody else. And the crazy thing is, after he lost consciousness, he was transported away from the scene, and the tanker only exploded later, which means that the people were present well after this evidence was right in front of their eyes.
You spoke earlier on, Stan, about whether we are equipped to handle such incidents, and it doesn't look like we are. What can be done to improve on that so that we should be ready if and when incidents like this happen?
Most definitely. So just as an example, there are 2 ways in which these kinds of fires are typically approached on an international level. Obviously, in South Africa, we might have a challenge with regards to resources, funding. I don't know. I can't explain why we are where we are. But one of the technologies that is available is a so-called robotic cannon. That's where you actually have a tractor device with the hose attached to it, and the fire personnel can stand as much as 100 or 150 meters away and actually drive a robot into the scene with the water. You also get something called the ground monitor, which is kind of a device that stands on the ground that you can attach a hose to so that the personnel won't have to be there. You can move that ground monitor to within reach of the flames of the particular burning vehicle, and the personnel can pull back. We've been very fortunate. Even at Boksburg, we lost no lives as far as the fire department personnel is concerned, and most certainly not with regards to first responders. But the fact is that if there are mistakes made, or the incident happens without adequate warning and they can't evacuate in time, those people are exposed as well. And by the time the firemen, like if we go back to the Boksburg incident, none of the firemen were killed in the blast, which means to me that they must have seen the trouble coming and must have started running away or evacuating. If they did, that should be a clear indication to the public that it's way more dangerous than they even imagined. And unfortunately, we now know that 41 lives were lost and 41 people, succumbed to that. Let's call it mistake, because we can't really blame them. It's the world we live in. And of course, here we are.
All right, Stan, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Do have Merry Christmas for you and your family.